Welcome to the podcast, fellow griever. I'm Melissa, your host, and I'm with you on this journey because my own incredible 21-year-old son, Alex, died by suicide on August 7th in 2016. My world was shattered, but slowly, bit by bit, I began the difficult journey of rebuilding a new life, just like you may be doing right now. So know that I see you, because I am you. Thank you so much for being here. It truly means more than I can say. And if you are new to the podcast, please consider listening to the introduction, Meet Me, episode number 1, which is now linked in the show notes starting in late season 6. Listen to know what to expect from the podcast, to learn more about me, and so that you will know all that I offer in my community for support, connection, and healing. If you are not a new listener and haven't listened to this Meet Me episode recently, it's updated and you may learn something new. Every week, we will continue to explore the questions that haunt us, seek the courage to uncover the healing tools within us, and offer the comfort of a community we all need so very much. Come along with me, because this is so very lonely, but we do not have to be alone. Together, let's choose to find meaning and even happiness amid the leftover pieces before us. Welcome to today's episode. Hello, Griever, and today you are going to be listening to Season 6, Episode 38, Suicide Loss Widow. Michelle Collins joins me today, and this was an amazing conversation. I'm excited to be able to bring it to you. I have not had the opportunity to speak to nearly as many spouses as I would like who have lost a spouse to suicide. And Michelle came to suicide loss with many other significant losses under her belt. And yet, this one was different. And she speaks to what it looks like to inhabit joy at this point in her life. And those of you that have listened to me for a while may know that I often talk about finding joy and the quest that we're on to rebuild our life. And today, Michelle and I talk about many things. We pack a whole lot into this hour, and I hope that you'll stay with me when I all the way to the end of this conversation. I'm going to read a little bit about Michelle, and then I'll tell you kind of what to expect today. Michelle is a dedicated professional who helps individuals navigate grief, trauma, and loss through her organization aptly named Inhabit Joy. She's a certified mindfulness meditation teacher who also is a grief educator and wellness coach, she's also a yogi and a yoga therapist. She combines her knowledge of positive psychology, neuroscience, and mindfulness to be able to guide people towards resilience. Her personal journey through significant losses includes her mother's death and her husband's suicide, which both transformed her growth and inspired her best-selling books, Surviving Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss, and The Companion Supporting a Survivor of Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss. So in addition to her private practice, Michelle also holds workshops and wellness programs in corporate settings, and that's really where she's moving her practice at this point, although she does still do some one-on-one coaching. She emphasizes mindfulness, yoga therapy, and wellness strategies, particularly for suicide loss survivors, and helps them aim towards normalizing conversations around grief and suicide. Her mission is to help individuals cope with loss while rediscovering joy and purpose, which, as you know, that's all somebody that's after my own heart and my own mission. Just a few of the things Michelle and I talk about today that I can't wait to share with you include, of course, mindfulness, because that's both of our kind of grief love language, if you will. She talks about her compound losses. We also hear her address interesting things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the 4 A's. I'll keep the 4 A's a mystery for you to hear when you're listening to the podcast. She talks about the power of the pause and meeting our own needs. She even addresses faith and so much more. Oh, and you also get to hear her call me out on something, and it's all good. She was not wrong, and it was a great catch on her part and a good add to our conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to let us get into this conversation and welcome Michelle. Hi, and welcome to the podcast, Michelle. It is I'm so glad to have you on. And that does sound weird to say out of my mouth now. I still have trouble sometimes saying this is exciting, or I'm glad we're talking, because I don't wish we were talking for this reason. We came together through a mutual connection that many of my audience know, Carol Brookings, and that was how I was introduced to you. But our path led us to where it took us a little while to connect over the last, year and a half or so. And I'm really glad we finally are. So I want to welcome you to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, like you said, happy to be here. Well, not happy that we have this subject in common in our lives, but happy that we can be in a community and a space where we can share our stories in hopes of helping others with the similar difficult loss. So
exactly.
It's kind of an honor, kind of a sacred space to be able to do this.
You say the same words I do. I was saying before we were recording that I'm seeing a lot of similarities in how we do business, the mindset that we come to it with, and the practices that we have in. So to hear you say some of these things that I'm like, I say that all the time. So I would like to not get going before we have a moment to stop. And I would love you to share your lost story with the audience so that they don't just know the introduction that I gave. They get to hear you talk about what brings you here.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. And I do want to thank you for creating this sacred space for open communication about loss, because I think that's the most healing thing you can do. Talk about it, working through it. So it's hard to pinpoint a particular beginning to my story, because I had a loss, a life-changing loss when I was 6 years old. I had a life-changing loss when I was 41 years old. And then I lost my husband to suicide. I guess I was 50 when he died in 2016. Now, everyone just don't do the math.
Right. I think we're pretty close. We're right there.
Okay. So, yeah. When in each of these major losses, one was my grandmother, one was my mother, really sent my life on a different trajectory. My grandmother that died when I was 6 was my person. When I was the youngest of 4 children, and very rarely when you're the youngest of 4 do you have the complete attention of an adult. And I basically felt like I had my own adult. My grandma was my person, and I had all the attention I needed. Other kids were older and off in school, and I got to sit on her lap and she would read to me. And I have a lot of fond memories of her. And then when she died, I became the 4th of 4 kids, and it was really life altering for me. I mean, I had a great mom, but I didn't have my grandma anymore. And then fast forward, I guess 30 some years, and then my mom, 40, I don't know, I'm not doing math. My mom was diagnosed with leukemia when I was in my late 30s, and my children were 1, 4, and 7. And my mom, at that point, was my person. She was, the punctuation mark between everything that happened my entire day. And she was helping me so much with raising my children that everything sort of flipped upside down, because instead of having my mom helping me, I all of a sudden became her caregiver, co-caregiver with my dad. And instead of having her help me with my children, I had to hire help so that I could be with my mom during her treatments, her chemo and radiation and bone marrow transplant. So 3.5 years later, she passed after a valiant fight with leukemia. And again, it was a major shift in my life, because I went from having the most supportive person to taking care of my dad that first year, and my husband and my 3 kids, and not having that table leg, basically. So fast forward, then I got divorced, which was also a major loss, of course, and very challenging for me and my kids. Met my husband, Glenn, a year after my divorce, and we got married very quickly. We got married in just 3 months because we just felt like we filled in each other's missing pieces. Like together we were one amazing whole. And for those of you who, for your listeners and for you who know that relationships are based on two whole people, you can imagine that there was some difficulties. Anything that comes to mind is probably something that happened over the next couple of years. And he was also suffering from, not that I knew it at the time, but there's a condition called CTE that they're discovering now. There's a lot of research on it. There wasn't really much back then, and this is April of 2016 is when he died. It's when you have multiple blasts, multiple head injuries, and they're doing studies specifically in Navy SEALs, which my husband Glenn was a Navy SEAL for many years. He served in the armed forces for 22 years, and most of that was in the SEAL teams as a trainer. So he was exposed and probably had those same brain injuries. The symptoms were certainly similar to what I read about now, but at the time, it just came across as a very irrational behavior that after a while began to make me feel very uncomfortable, scared, traumatized. So we separated. I actually asked him to move out, and it was an incredibly difficult decision. Had I had more awareness of his difficulties, actually, I'm not going to say that because we did try everything. I was a yoga teacher and meditator, and I tried getting him to therapy, all of the things, and nothing was working. And then a month after he moved out, he ended his life. So that, I would say, of the losses I've described, was the one that was the most sharply pivotal. I really went into a very deep, dark, bad place, smothered by guilt, tried to self-soothe with all of the unhealthy choices that you can make for self-soothing, including lots of chemicals, some prescribed, some not, anything to avoid the pain. Then I developed PTSD. And I started dissociating, which was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced, where I'm somewhere and my body's somewhere else. And that's when I knew I needed to find therapy. And I told a friend of mine about it. And my friend was also very aware of my drug use and threatened to put me in rehab, which, of course, I was thinking, well, that's insane. I'm not an addict. So those two things got me into trauma therapy. And that is what saved my life. We practiced a lot of somatic therapy, which is reconnecting with the body, the opposite of dissociation. And that also works really well for me as a yogi because yoga is very strongly somatic. You're connecting with your body, your feelings, your emotions, your physical body, all connected in the same place. And it took some time, but I stopped having those dissociative episodes. And flashbacks. Those are the two things that were debilitating to me to the point where I could not function with those two symptoms of PTSD. And my healing journey began in full force at that point. I started meditating every day. I learned to teach meditation. I learned Ayurveda, which is kind of the medical science that's connected with yoga, and just wrote my books and trying to be a light and a healer and a help for others who are in similar spaces. There's so much grief out there, and there's so much suffering that can be alleviated with the skills that I can share and that you share, and these spaces we create, awareness.
Yeah, I agree. First thing I want to do is thank you for sharing all of that, because it doesn't matter how many times we share it, it's still hard. We talked about that a little bit before. There's no way for it not to be. And so for you to be willing to go there to help other people is a really big thing. And I just want to thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I can feel it. I mean, I feel when I tell that story, which isn't that often, the heaviness in my chest, my eyes are getting wet. And it's those types of things that I've learned really to connect with. Like, oh, I'm upset right now,
Mhm.
but Melissa's holding this beautiful space for me. I feel safe here. And so I can share this incredibly difficult, sad story.
Yeah, that's so relevant. It's so relevant. And what you spoke to there is what I talk to all the time about how I tell people if you can't do any one thing early on, find a community, find some place that feels
Mm-hmm.
safe. Because that word safe, I told you we use a lot of the same words. I use that word
Mm-hmm.
a lot because people will say things like, well, I'll use the retreats as an example because they're fairly new example. I mean, I guess we're getting this summer, it'll be a year since I started them, but I have had women, even in community, say this thing, but I remember at the first retreat, which was July of last year, that I do for moms that have experienced the loss of a child to suicide. But I had a couple of the moms and they were a little hesitant the first day or two, but when they finally let their guard down and they lean into the experience and the healing and all the stuff we do, to start to see them laugh and lean
Mm-hmm.
into each other and
Yeah.
smile. And then to hear them say, this is the first time I've actually laughed from an uninhibited standpoint since losing my child. And how is this
Mm-hmm.
happening? Why here? And so, my biggest thing to say to them is you're safe here. There's a safety
Yeah.
to let down your guard, to know that anything you share and anything you feel, whether it be from one extreme to another, is held and seen versus the big bad world. And we know that if we go from laughing 1 minute to crying, people are going to go, oh my gosh, what in the world happened to her?
Right. Oh,
And they're going
there's
to try,
emotions.
yeah,
I
yeah.
better run,
And
not
let's
emotions.
just label them bad emotions. Like I've talked about that recently with people about how we have to get away from the idea that sadness and anger and all of that is bad, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
fix it if it's bad. So we have to make it
Mm-hmm.
good, which is, I guess, happy. And in
Yeah.
reality, none of us can
Positive.
feel that
I
one
call them
emotion all the time.
desirable and non and undesirable emotions.
Right. But reality is we can't have one without the other. And there are times in our life that we're not going to be as happy as others. That doesn't mean we're unhappy. It just means we're in a different place at that time, right? And there are times that with
Yeah.
grief and sadness, those are the things that we need to hold at that point. There's times that I tell people sometimes we have to sit in the suck. Sometimes we have to sit there
Sit
because
in the suck. I like that.
in order to the whole adage of you have to heal it to feel it, there's truth in that. There's leaning into these emotions and using them in a productive way to work forward in our grief, because we can't just go, oh, that feels bad, let's not feel that.
Yeah.
That's avoidance. That's a lot of
Well,
things,
and
but it's not healthy.
emotions are part of the beautiful human experience, all emotions. And mindfulness, which is my sort of focus for all of my healing practices, tells us emotions are a temporary experience. They're just an experience. And I try to, when I work with people or when I give talks, I gave a talk actually called Feel It to Heal It, which is funny because you just said that. We're like soul sisters, I think. Um, but I just remind people emotions, the actual physical response to an emotion lasts about 90 seconds. It's the continued thoughts about what caused the emotion that cause us to stay in a state of whatever it is.
Suck or suck, whichever one it is, right?
Right.
Sometimes you're both. Yeah, exactly. And it's true. And that's what I'd love for us to spend a little bit of time talking about mindfulness in general. So, but right now, I want to be sure that you have a chance to talk about kind of my passion, which is this whole idea of mindfulness, which leans into choice, which people have a hard time with because I didn't choose this. It happened.
Mm-hmm.
This happened to me and I can't do anything about it and I'm never going to be any better and it's just what it is.
Right.
And the reality is, like you said about the 90 seconds, now this lasts longer than 90 seconds and so does the grief. We have so much disconnectedness from the appropriate way to feel and handle this kind of grief that we try to therapize it away. We try to ignore it away. We try to medicate it away. We try to do lots of things. And really, it has to start inside of us, right? It comes from, because that's where the healing's going to come. It's going to come from inside of
Yeah,
us, body, mind, and
absolutely.
soul, which comes from mindfulness and connectiveness to not
Right.
only others that understand, but a greater source of some sort, a greater source of power and understanding. So for me, because I lean into everything being body, mind, and soul, and knowing that you do too, you understand that whole concept of there has to be a choice made. And then there's choices along the way, right? It's all about, because
Right.
we have so much more control over our mind than we want to think that we do, right? We have more choice
Hmm.
about how to reframe thoughts, how to rewire things, how to look at things in a different way. And it isn't just about, oh, think positive. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I want you to, because that is a thing where people want to go, please don't say to me, just choose to be happy. That's not what I'm saying. That's an
Right.
oversimplification because I don't
Yeah.
believe you can just choose to be happy. I do think we can choose the direction that our life goes. We can choose kind of what I
Yeah.
call the how, what, and whys. We can choose how we go about it. We can choose why. We can choose what we do. And
Hmm.
I would never in a million years not want my son still here. That wasn't my choice. And I'm not saying it was his either. I'm just saying it wasn't my choice. It's something that happened. Death happens.
Hmm.
And so because I can't choose to have him back, I can say now, 8.5 years in, definitively, I am a better version of myself than I've ever been. In many ways, I have a happier life than I've ever had. And that sounds in conflict to some people, but I think you understand, especially because we're very similar in the time length that we've been on the suicide loss journey. We both have
Hmm.
had significant losses and been carrying that for most of our life. But this idea that we can mindfully choose how to integrate this into us, how we evolve, the life that we have, and the mindsets that we have, and the things that we want to overcome. Those things are choices. That doesn't mean there's not work behind the choices. That's the part
Hmm.
I don't want to oversimplify. I don't want people to think I'm looking at them today, broken and sad, and having just experienced the loss and saying, just choose to be happy, because Melissa would never,
Yeah.
ever do that. But I am saying we can choose to take control over our healing and our wellness. And I always
Yeah. Yeah.
the distinction that I use, since you and I don't have previous time with each other, is when I talk about healing, I believe we'll grieve forever, because unless we quit loving the person, we're always going to have some form of grief. I teach people to learn to live successfully with their grief in a good manner. And I talk about healing the trauma, because we can heal our trauma. We can learn to reframe and do all the things
100%.
that the trauma is
Yep.
healed. But sometimes
Hmm.
people mistake it for me saying that they can heal and just forget that they're like, well, be good. I'm good. My loved one's gone, but I don't care. You're still going to care. You're 100% going to care.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm talking about. So I'd love for you to lean into this whole idea of mindfulness and holistic healing a
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
and just share your thoughts on it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. One thing that I thought of while you were talking, David Kessler was my grief guru. He's the one who I took his certification course in grief education. And he always says that like you said, the grief doesn't go away, but you have reached sort of the healing plateau when the love outweighs the pain. So you can think of the person that you've lost and feel more love than pain. The pain's never going to go away, but like you said, the love also. And so if you have more feeling of love, then that's a desirable feeling, right? Or like we were talking about earlier, desirable and undesirable emotions. What mindfulness does, and I don't want to belittle, like you said, I don't want people to think it's like you're at a buffet and you're going to choose like the pudding instead of the meatloaf because you want to feel happy with your chocolate pudding or whatever. You don't get to just pick your feelings like that. But with a mindfulness practice, you can, there's a pause. That's one of the things that I have found the most powerful about my mindfulness practice is the feeling comes, but instead of saying, I am angry, I can take a pause and say, all right, deep breath. I'm feeling anger right now. And when you say, I am feeling right now, that recognizes the fact that all emotions are temporary. Emotions come, emotions go, always. Thoughts come, thoughts go. Thoughts, feelings come, feelings go. It's when we choose to, most of our thoughts, 90% of our thoughts say, I don't know how they measure it, but that's what I've read, are the same thoughts we had yesterday. So this is where the mindfulness pause comes in. You notice you're having the same thought you had yesterday. You take a pause and you realize, I could think about something completely different. Same thing with an emotion. When you notice the emotion and you name it, you disempower it. I am feeling anger right now. And then you can go further. Instead of being angry, and which usually leads to an action that we, a behavior that we don't necessarily desire, right? You're yelling at someone, you're hanging up, you're flipping someone off, you're honking at them, you're breaking something. These not necessarily desirable feelings or behaviors that you have when you're angry. Instead of that, you get to, okay, why am I angry right now? You inquire, what set me off? Because most of the time, why you're feeling anger has nothing to do with what just happened. It has something to do with a pattern you've developed over the years due to some unmet need. And when I was studying at the Chopra Center, they always described the unmet needs as, it's kind of a distilled down version of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. After the physical basics are met, it's acceptance, appreciation, affection. I'm going to forget. It's the 4 A's: attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance. Most of the time, when you have an undesirable emotion, you have an unmet need that is one of the 4 A's. And if you can identify it, like maybe your husband showed up after work today and he's in a crappy mood and he walked in and he didn't give you the hug you've been waiting for all day. So you're pissed and he's pissed and this is not going the way you want it to go for the evening, right? But if you stop, and ideally he stops also because he also practices mindfulness, right? And you're like, honey, I really needed a hug when you got home, but instead you came in railing on your boss. I need a hug right now. Can we just pause? And it can shift the entire thing. And this translates to grieving as well. When you notice, I am just abjectly sad right now because I miss my baby, you can figure out how to meet your unmet need. What do you need? I mean, obviously, you need the person to still be alive. We can't do that. But I need a hug. I need to call Melissa and talk to her. I need to go to a meeting. I need to read Michelle's book because it's empowering and supportive. I need to meditate, but whatever it is.
I need to, yeah.
Right. Or maybe I'm just hungry. Maybe your blood sugar's low. Check the physical first, right? Hunger, thirst, tired, hot, cold. It could be something as simple as that. If you're really out of touch with your emotions, sometimes people are just hungry and they're just really crabby. So
that's why there's a name for that.
Hangry, yeah. So that's where mindfulness can be just the absolute help for healing, for realizing what we need and then going to get our needs met at that moment. Or just even just being with it, being with the suck, as you say. I'm sad, and just sitting there and realizing I'm just really sad, but understanding that being sad is just part of our human experience. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to make it so you're suffering because you're sad, but it's not permanent, and it can be managed, or it can at least be nurtured.
Yeah. You just said something about suffering that made me think about something when I heard it the first time. I'm trying to think of, you may even know what it said, but the exact phrase has something to do with loss happens, but suffering is optional, I think is something like that. But it's suffering
pain,
is optional. Pain happens, but suffering is optional.
Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yep. And when I
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
heard that years ago, I kind of took exception with it because as a
Hmm.
grieving
Hmm.
mom, my brain went, what do you mean suffering is optional? This wasn't
Hmm.
optional for me. Like nobody gave me the option of, do you want to lose Alex or don't you? So
Yep.
I took it that way. Right. And I was still in a different headspace then.
Hmm.
As suffering isn't optional. I'm going to suffer. My kid's gone.
Right.
That's not what it's saying. I don't take exception with it now at all. I agree. We have a choice on how we respond to this. It's the same thing as I didn't choose what happened to me, but I get to choose the response.
Right.
I always tell people, if you're in your first year, and I live in the ish world, I've said ish a lot on this podcast over the years because you can't give anybody an exact in 12 months, but in the ish
Yeah.
year of a year ish,
That's not supportive.
right. Yeah. What you need to do during that is just survive. It really is a survival year. So I'm not giving a whole
Hmm.
lot of advice to people or even recommendations other than do what it takes to get through. Do what it takes to survive. Yes, start gathering tools. Yes, find a place to connect. Yes, those things, but you're laying the foundation for the real work you're going to do later because you're just really, even when you don't realize it in that first year, you're just still very shrouded by the shock and you're just going through all the motions. And so I tell people that after you get to that, past that survival, because there is a certain
Hmm.
honoring of the morning, there's a certain sacredness. We talked about that earlier of
Yeah. Yeah.
morning and of being able to, back in the day, and in some cultures they still do it, but back in the day, even in this country, there were more rituals accepted
Hmm.
around grieving, whether it was covering mirrors, whether it was wearing black, whether it was a wreath on the
Hmm.
door. There was all these things that signified that you were in a sacred morning space. And
Yeah.
we've gotten away with that. We now have, oh, you get 3 days off of bereavement leave, or when are you coming back?
Right.
Like, I took you a casserole. Did
Yeah.
you get the casserole? Because I didn't get your thank you note. And we live in this. I mean, well, it's
Right.
true. I mean, I have actually had grievers say to me, I still have the thank you note sitting on my desk and it's been 6 months. I can't make myself write thank yous. And I said, you're not going to write them. Just give up on
Yeah.
it. Give yourself permission to say, I don't need to thank the people that came for
Right.
that week and gave me some food
And
or
those
whatever.
people who supported you and are expecting a thank you don't get it. They need to read one of our books.
That was
Because
what I was
that
getting
it's
at, was it's the person that's
right.
like, where's my thank you note, that you don't need to thank the other
No.
people that would deserve the thank you note. No, they already know how
Right.
thankful you are, right? Because they've been there.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
so yes, this whole idea of this Western grief illiterate culture that we live in, and where, so when I'm talking about the early grieving, that is not where I'm casting my stones. That is not where I'm saying, because you don't have as much choice in the early days other than to start to get up, to start to get dressed, to start to shower more
Right.
regularly, all the
Just the
things that,
basics.
yeah. And
Yeah.
then start to collect the tools, start to do the things that will serve you when you can really start to make those mindful choices. And we can do it on a small level in the first year, but we really have to get through a lot of those first. We just do. It's a rite of passage to get through the first everything. It depends on what your loss is, whether it's the first anniversary, as in wedding
Right.
anniversary, or if it's the birthday, or then there's always the big first, when we get past the
Well,
first.
and this is another thing that I really stress when I'm teaching mindfulness and grief recovery is that these tools will come in handy for when something happens. And I want to give you an example that happened recently to me. So I lost my spouse, as I've said, in 2016. And it took me years and years before I was ready to date again. And I finally started dating, and it took a long time for me to find somebody that I kind of clicked with and connected with. And I was dating a guy just last year, July and August. And August 25th, he died suddenly of a stroke. So we had been
Wow.
dating, I know, but we had been dating less than 2 months. And
Still, it's a huge activator for you.
oh, it was, uh, yeah. But the reason I bring it up is that I had so many tools that even though, and I'd only known him 2 months, so it wasn't as deep of a trauma, right? As someone who
It was
say I've
more a
been married to or
reactivator of your past
known all my
traumas.
life. It
Yeah.
was very much that. But I had all these mindfulness tools dialed up and ready to go. And I would know when I was up in the middle of the night crying, or when someone, one of the people that I was talking to said, well, you know how to do this. Like, you should be fine. You know how to do this. Uh,
The things people say, that's a whole book. That's a whole book.
right.
Yeah.
That's a chapter, right? Or maybe a whole book. But so, what I'm saying, my point in bringing up this story is that there is a way to create resilience by practicing mindfulness ahead of the difficult times. Using the past, right? Using the fact that you survived everything that you have survived, and being able to know that when you're in the thick of grief again, which
Mm-hmm.
I hope none of us are, but I'm just saying it's a possibility.
The longer we're around, the more likely it will continue to touch us. It's just because it's the one thing we're all going to do.
Right, right. Death will happen. So I do want to just say that all of the tools that I had and the awareness that I had developed with the experience of grief and the studying of grief and the studying of mindfulness helped me get through that incredible shock, right? And then the grieving, what we could have had. I grieved a lot of, because we were just starting, I grieved our future, the plans we were just starting to make, the family that I was going to have when I started meeting his kids and his siblings and everything, who I ended up meeting all of them at his funeral. I was able to see that for the experience that it was, and not let it take over my life like my previous experiences with grief. And it was huge and it was hard. And it still sucks. I'm still, to be honest, pissed.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's the thing, is sometimes people think that we're saying, just do this. It's make a choice. And somehow by saying that, we're saying it's easy. And I tell people this still isn't easy. In talking about tools, even when you think, gosh, another tool, and most of us have a frame of reference in adult life that we know the people that are mechanic. They have the big, I'll just say the red Craftsman tool chests, and some of them seem like they go on for an entire wall, like they're the big ones on wheels, and versus the little toolbox that you carry around in your hand. I joke that I started with that little toolbox and now I've got the wall of Craftsman
Yeah.
tools.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
to your point, anything else that occurs to me, the more I continue to heal, the more I continue to lean into mindfulness and the modalities and all the things I do, the better equipped I am when life happens again. Because I'll promise you, I'm going to borrow a phrase from one of my moms at the last retreat: life gets lifey whether we want it to or not.
It
If
keeps
she listens,
happening.
she's going to laugh because she'll be like, she took that from me. Yes, I
It
did.
keeps happening.
Life
It does
keeps
keep happening.
happening. It just keeps
I
getting,
like that. Life
life
keeps
gets
lifing.
lifey. It gets lifey. Because she was talking about how after the week at the retreat and everybody was so relaxed and leaning into each other as moms and feeling so safe and a little bit joyful, a little bit sad to be getting ready to go. One of them said to one of the other moms, that when we get back, life is going to get so lifey that we're going to forget about some of this. And so that but they don't have to. And part of the practice I do after the retreats to keep them mindful is, I wonder if this is a book you've ever heard of. It is, and I did a different version of this with my first group of ladies from the retreat, but I'm probably going to stay with this for a while. It's called A Walk in the Wood: Meditations and Mindfulness from a Bear Named Pooh. And
Oh,
it's not written in it's not childish at all. But it's such a nice frame of reference. And so for the 6 weeks post retreat, I'm sending them a video email every week to go through the different mindfulness steps in this book, doing 3 chapters at a time, to challenge them to not forget what they've learned,
mm-hmm.
and that the mindfulness journey requires exactly that we're mindful of it, that we don't just go to the retreat, assume we're fixed, and leave and go back to old habits. If we're
Right.
learning things that are helpful, if we've acquired tools, it is within our duty, if we want to continue this journey in a healing manner, to mindfully pull those out and to know when to use them. Like to be able to say,
Mm-hmm.
this is sad and this hurts, but I know what to do. And
Yeah.
I tell people, if they think 8.5 years in, I don't still cry for the loss of my son on a regular basis. Absolutely, I do. Some days I can tell my story and not crack, and other days when I think I'm all set and good to go and I can tell it, I can't hardly get through it because it's still just right there below the surface. But I have all these tools that have helped me bring his life into the light and not his death, and have helped me remember, like you said, I loved hearing that love plateau thing because it's so true. I don't use it, but now I will. I can borrow that from you and talk about it. Because I did talk about it like a dieting plateau one day, where I say so
Mm-hmm.
many people get to that place where they feel like I've got 10 pounds left to go and they just can't make it budge. A lot of people get to this space in their healing and they get frustrated. And then they go, I'm just never going to be okay. And instead of being mindful and realizing you have to push past that sometimes of that plateau into the discomfort so you can grow some more, is a hard place to do. It's a hard thing
Yeah.
to do. But when you really do stop and say, I don't have control over how I feel at the moment, but after you get past that 90 seconds to you speaking, we do have a choice on how we respond at that point.
Yeah. There's two things I want to say before I forget about what you just said. One is the tools. So you and I are now in kind of the advanced area where we're actually turning it around and helping people.
Mm-hmm.
And not everyone ever needs to go to that space. You know,
Right.
don't have to find your purpose, which David Kessler's newest book is actually called Finding Meaning, which he's considering the sixth stage of grief.
Uh-huh.
But I've found that being in this helping place is also a great place to find tools. Like you just repeated your retreat attendees comment, you can get tools from anyone at any time. And some of my clients, my tools don't necessarily work for them, my grief coaching clients that I see, but something someone else said or did will.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a matter of being open to the idea that every single grief journey is independent. Nobody is going to be on your exact grieving path.
Right.
So I think that being able to be open to other people's experiences is really important when you're gathering your tools. That it might not be something that worked for you, but it might be something you can share with someone who it will work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing I just wanted to say back about when we were talking about the choice and the 90 seconds and the pause. So Viktor Frankl is a very famous psychotherapist that he was a Jewish doctor in Germany in the 1930s, 40s, not a great place to be a Jewish doctor. He ended up in a concentration camp. And he, after his experience there, came out with a book he survived and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And if anyone listening to this podcast has not read this book, I highly recommend it. It's one of the foundational books of self-help, if you can, if
What's
you'll
it called
allow me.
again?
Man's Search for Meaning by
I'll put
Viktor
I'll
Frankl.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Frankl spelled Frankl. So it's kind of strange, but
Okay.
he said, and this is something that has, I think, really launched modern mindfulness. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a pause. And in that pause is our freedom to choose. And in that choice lies our freedom. I messed that quote up, but that's, he doesn't say freedom twice. But anyway, off the top of my head, I think I did a pretty good job. And that quote to me has been really foundational.
Yeah. I love it. I will include that in the show notes. I'm probably going to order it because no, I don't know about that, but it sounds amazing and very
It's a
relevant.
difficult book to read
Yeah,
because
I
he
was going to
talks
say
about his time in the camps, but it is also very uplifting and hopeful. And he explains how people could come out of that situation with hope, healing, life. It's kind of flabbergasting.
We can come out of almost anything, I'm convinced, with hope, healing, and life to still be lived if we so choose, right? If we so
Hmm.
choose. And I know that on some level, we've been down different journeys. And then on some levels, we've been down very similar journeys. I'm curious to know if, as a spouse, because that's not my journey, if you feel like there's anything that you would like to share, and I don't want to take you back to a painful place, you've already gone back there, but you're safe with sharing any of that with me. But I want to know if there's anything you would want to share with other spouses that are listening, looking for that hope, ones that are in the earlier years of looking back now and
Hmm.
thinking, if I had just maybe done this sooner, or if I had leaned into this or looked into that, because that's what we're doing. We're out there looking for answers and we're looking for hope. And
Yeah.
those can come in the strangest places, but we do have the ability now to look back over a number of years and say, because I wish I could have found someplace like I have
Hmm.
sooner.
Yeah.
I wish I could have found the tools that I needed sooner. I might not have had a stroke, but I couldn't find things readily. The resources are not as available as they should be, especially after suicide loss, because it's still so stigmatized.
Yeah.
And so is mental health in general, right? So you just
Right.
put that on top of it, and our mental health suffers afterwards. So we become a griever, but then when we're a traumatic loss survivor griever, we also sometimes become afflicted with our own mental health struggles as a part of our grief. So then we become part of the stigma, which almost digs us in harder sometimes and makes us even more isolated. But in thinking back about your journey, and maybe you did everything perfect, although you've already alluded to maybe not. Because I mean, I'd like
Absolutely
to meet
not.
the perfect griever so far. I haven't met one, because this tends to just bust our world wide open, right? So
Right.
how do you do things perfect? But if you had any, like, I don't want to say singular pieces of advice, but any thoughts of hope, any couple of, oh, and I'm not necessarily trying to get you to wrap up here. I'm just curious to go back and for a minute to sit in that space and hold some space for you as a grieving spouse who lost what I presume, at least up until the point you split, you were hoping you were to spend your entire life with this human, that this would be the person
Yeah.
you would go through the rest of your life with. And so to have lost that daily, every day, every night, every morning person is huge. How do you speak to earlier grievers when you do?
Well, first of all, I do want to say that I think, at least in my experience, most of the spouses who have lost their spouse to suicide, have a really mixed bag at the end of the marriage. Very few, and I have heard of some, have absolutely no idea there's anything going on, and then their spouse dies. But most of us, it's like my experience, and there's so much guilt. I should have been kinder. I shouldn't have made him move out. You should on
Do it all over
yourself
yourself, right?
into further misery. So that just increases your suffering. So my first bit of advice is self-compassion and acceptance. Be nice to yourself. You did not know whatever that last thing you said to him. And I still shudder when I think about my last conversation with Glenn and how I wish it had been different. But I'm not to the point now where I beat myself up about it anymore. And that took a lot of work. I was horrified by my behavior the day before he died, our last conversation. Would it have changed things if I'd been different? Probably not, because when someone is determined to end their life, they're going to do it and you can't stop them. So, the first thing, self compassion. Try to replace the guilt. Again, this is a choice of thought. When you feel guilty and you start coulda, shoulda, woulda-ing, realize that there isn't anything you could have done. And there's nothing you can do because it happened. So that's where the acceptance. So self compassion and acceptance. Highly recommend reading these two books that I wrote, Surviving Spouse or Partner Suicide Loss. It addresses all of that stuff. And then the companion book, hand that out to all your friends and family who are supporting you. If you're not a big book person, hey, my audiobooks are coming out soon, so you can listen to them. But if you're not a big book person, then just what Melissa is offering, find support. Call me, email me, I'm here for you. Find someone who's been through it so you know you're not alone. There's a group called Soaring Spirits, which the entire group, it's an international group all about spouse and partner suicide loss. Everybody in that group has lost a spouse or partner to suicide. And if you weren't married, if you were divorced, if you were separated, whatever, it still counts. Don't belittle your grief by saying, oh, well, we were only together 3 months, or, oh, we were about to get divorced. Or one thing I do find a lot of is people are already divorced. And so then they have disenfranchised grief. Well, you weren't even his wife anymore. Why would you be grieving him? It's like, oh, no.
Yeah.
The grief is real. The grief is there. So don't belittle your grief. And then I am going to disagree with you about one thing. I'm going to make one anti-Melissa point.
Go ahead.
You said you've never met a perfect griever. I'm going to say every griever is perfect. I believe
I love that challenge. I love that.
Everyone is on their exact grieving journey.
I agree with you.
Oh, you said it. It's fine. You didn't do anything wrong. But I do believe that every grief experience is a perfect experience for the person going through it. And I know that's really cringy when you're suffering, but it is exactly what's happening. And that's
exactly
another mindfulness.
where you're supposed to be. You're exactly right. I actually have said that a lot. I think about the last group of women that went through legacy, and several times one or more of them would say, I'm so sorry I'm behind, or I'm not as far ahead as that person is. And I always say, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. That's why I have a lot of method to my madness. I absolutely have an agenda, but it's as flexible as the day is long, and it's flexible to be customized per person. So this whole idea that I'm not where they are, I'm not supposed to, you're where you're supposed to be. So embrace that. It's going to come together. I promise. So yeah, I know I don't need to redeem myself, but I'm really glad you said that, because I didn't mean it. Could absolutely been taken that way by people. So thank you for bringing it up. Because by perfect grief, I mean like a textbook perfect.
Right.
Because people will say, well, I'm trying to follow this program and I'm not doing it right. And I say, you're doing it the way you need to be doing it.
There's no wrong in grieving.
We all hold ourselves to the standard of, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not doing it at the right timeline, or the way someone expects.
And honestly, do we need that? Do we need to be picking on ourselves?
No unnecessary
about
pressure.
How we're grieving? I mean, seriously, you're in enough difficulty as it is, and then you're going to pick on yourself.
You're exactly right. And I think the same thing is like, what in the world? Why are we so worried about whether we're doing it this worst thing ever up to somebody else's standards? And why would we even do that?
That's what I say. Just be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. I mean, it took me so long to get to the point where I didn't blame myself for Glenn's death because I made him move out of my house. And did that guilt accomplish anything? Did it do any good in the entire universe for me to be horribly mean to myself and just aghast at myself for asking my husband to move out after he had gotten violent and I was afraid of him? No, it did zero good at any level.
Well, and even from the standpoint of coming at it as a mother and saying that mothers have this thing of thinking that we should be able to have control over the choices that our children make. And for anybody that's listening, whether you've lost a child or somebody else, the whole idea that we actually think that we could control that is in itself centered in a place that we do have to examine, right? It's in the examination of that stuff that we do start to peel it back, and we're able to start to reframe and say, but could I ultimately have controlled the outcome? Because and I study ancient Stoicism, so it's really easy for me to think through the process. Applying it isn't always as easy, but realizing that ultimately we really have next to no control over even ourselves. Meaning there's certain things that we can control in our world, but a vast majority of it we can't. We can't control if something drops out of the sky and lands on our head. We can't control whether we're going to come down with a terminal illness next week that we don't know is already inside of us. There's so much that we can't control about even our own destiny and selves, let alone to think we would have any control over somebody else's. And
yeah, I call that the illusion of control. I
yep.
don't actually believe we have any control over anything.
Next, you heard me say next to nothing. I'm like, and that's
Right.
a hard pill to swallow. But when we get to that place of being able to fully embody that idea, I'm just now getting into soul contracts and trying to understand some of that a little bit deeper. I would still rather have him here physically. And yet I have a deeper relationship with him now because we're more connected at the soul, and we're always connected. We're like, so it's so different, but to realize that this was part of the purpose of his soul.
Well, and I think when you talk about that, it's really important to note that if people don't believe, that's okay. If people, I can't swallow this soul thing. There's a lot of people out there who don't believe there's anything after this life. But I think when you're ready, it can be one of the most soothing and supportive things is to have that faith, that belief in spirit, that belief that the people we love live on in spirit. Like you said, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And that is something I don't mean to be hawking my books here, but it's one of the very last chapters because I want people to have lots of time before I start talking about faith. But whatever type of faith you can develop beyond the physical, belief in the physical can help when you're grieving a loss. It can be so supportive. It can be such a relief. I know that Glenn's over there and on the other side and doing great work to help his SEAL team buddies and their families to heal. Yeah, I all of my people, my mom, my grandma. I actually have a whole army over there. I have a college. And this new guy I was dating, I was telling you about, who just died August. Yeah, and I believe they're all over there, also fulfilling a soul journey, but also able to still be here with us when we think of them, when we remember the love we felt for them.
Yeah, I agree. So I looked up Viktor Frankl just briefly while we were talking, and I was looking for the quote because I thought it's bound to be here if I just pull up top noted quotes by him. And I'm thinking that maybe it was the one, let's see, says between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. And our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Yes, that's the quote. I totally messed it up, but
there's a lot of what applies, which is even more like of a selling point. I don't know if these are all from his book. He's an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor. But he also says when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves.
Yes. Who also says that a lot is Wayne Dyer, who's another very highly esteemed spiritual teacher who he lived until I think he died in 2015. But Wayne Dyer, you can listen to podcasts that are of his old radio shows, and he's just an exceptional resource for manifesting and spirituality. And he does talk about grief a bit as well.
Well, and that quote right there, it's a good way for us to head towards the end of our conversation as we kind of wrap all this up. But it makes me think about, it's such a simple, like you could say that over and over again. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves, right? So it's the thought behind, I can't change what happened. I can only change how I respond, right? That's the simpler way of saying it.
Yeah.
But he's going to that bigger part of, we are challenged to change ourselves. part of the challenge
Mm-hmm.
I've taken on, especially in this last couple of years, things like moving to the Caribbean. There's a why now, why not part of it that
Mm.
for me, that this is the chance I have to dig in and choose to be the best version of myself, doing things that feed my soul, that help other humans. And I would have never had that challenge to change myself on this level if I hadn't had this loss. Now, that doesn't mean I wouldn't trade it all, but I can't. That's not my journey. This was my
Well,
journey.
right. We can't, just what you said, we can't change our situation. We can't change what happened, but we can change our thinking about it. We can change our response to it.
Yeah, 100%. Any final words or thoughts before we kind of slide into the end here and let you share any final thoughts that you have with our audience?
I'm just going to emphasize there's help and there are groups out there. If you need a therapist, great. If your therapist isn't helping you, find another therapist. If the grief if the grief group that you're attending, I just made up a word, isn't supportive, find another one. You have to be your own self advocate
Mhm.
in looking, but there are resources out there. When I first started my grief journey from my husband dying by suicide, I did not find any of these resources that I know of now. And I know they would have been helpful to me.
Mhm.
So just keep looking. And if you can't find anything, contact Melissa, contact me. We can point you in the right direction.
100%. That's why my resource page is exhaustive. I'm trying to find a different way to have it presented less exhaustively because there's a lot there. And I've received flack for that before. Melissa, why do you have a resource page full of other people's stuff? And I said, because I may not be the right place for them. One, maybe I don't hold
Mm-hmm.
a space for them. Say I'm not a spouse and I don't have spouses groups at this point in time. So I don't want them to just go, well, she can't help me. I don't want anybody to feel like there isn't help, like you just said, because I don't think I'll ever forget how lost I felt for the first 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was so lost in not being able to connect. And was I doing work and was I trying the best I could with what I had? I was, but I wasn't. If I'd found real resources to help me in this specific journey, build that toolbox up sooner and be surrounded by people that got it, it would have been so different. The outcome in that 3.5 years would have been so different. And that was my path. And so then this
Right.
is where I am now. But like you said, I
Mm-hmm.
want people to find help sooner. So as of tomorrow, I will have your books on my website book list page as well. And then we'll stay in touch as far as if somebody's listening and they're a spouse, especially if they're a spouse. I know you do things beyond spouses, but do take a minute as you wrap up. I know you've talked about your books and I'm glad that you did, but can you tell us, is there anything that you want people to know that you do in case they want to lean into services that you do currently offer?
Yeah, sure. Well, the only public service that I offer at the moment is one-to-one coaching. So if someone wanted to work with me, they could send me an email through my website. I've shifted my business more into corporate. So if you work for a company that wants a grief educator, that's kind of what I'm doing more of. But I do save a little bit of time for one-to-one coaching if people feel that's going to be supportive to them.
We
And
sure
hopefully at some point I will do a group like you do. I just haven't gotten that together yet. So,
we can stay in touch when that happens too. And I can always update my resources if that's something that you're offering, or if you're doing it through another place, we can always let people know also. But I know that siblings feel underheard. I know many spouses feel underheard in this space. And
yeah.
so I'm just so thankful that you were willing to come on and talk about it and to talk about why it matters that we do the work, right? That we lean in
Yeah.
and do the work. Any last hopeful message that you want to leave anybody with? And
Yeah, there is one thing I didn't address that I would like to mention, and that is the unique thing about spouse loss is that you really lose your identity because you were in a partnership and now you're single. and you maybe had a family like in-laws sometimes are very confused about your new relationship. Are you still related to me? Are you not? And these things can cause a lot of extra grief. So keeping that in mind and just going back to you're not alone. A lot of other people have gone through this. Be self-compassionate and persevere in finding those resources, and you will get through it.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing everything you've shared, Michelle. It's been my distinct honor and pleasure to have this conversation. Every single conversation I have, I walk away having learned something new, almost inevitably. I feel like I've gained a new friend. I feel like this was the right timing and the right place for us to connect. And if anybody wants to connect with Michelle, go to the show notes and know that I have all the beautiful places to connect with her there. And I will share any of the links, including Viktor Frankl's book and your books. And I will put your books on the website also on my resource page. So thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah,
this.
thank you, Melissa. Thank you for the work you do. It's so important and meaningful. And thank you for having me.
Likewise. Thank you. And we will talk very soon, my friend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So thank you for joining me today, Grievers. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing to get weekly updates when I drop new episodes. And please take a moment to rate and review the podcast with 5 stars, especially on Apple Podcasts. Your support helps so much because it's how others are able to find the podcast and this community. Remember, though it may feel impossible now, hope and healing are within reach. I invite you to connect further by visiting my website, theleftoverpieces.com, where you'll find support, legacy options, retreats, resources, online Zoom groups, and so much more. Together, we can navigate this journey of healing. We can put our hearts, our leftover pieces, back together. And as they say here in Puerto Rico, poco a poco, juntas podemos. Little by little, together we can. Take care and talk soon.